Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today in what promises to be an exciting, intriguing, full of curiosity topic, which I'm sure you've probably encountered in some form or fashion, whether that is LinkedIn or any other social media platform of your choosing. It's something that feels inescapable at this point of time. It's a combination of AI, it's a combination of MCP, and as it turns out, it is obviously a new tool that is out there. It's a standard that has promise. It has a lot of hope associated with it. It has a lot of potential associated with it. But there are also a whole lot of challenges associated with it. And we're going to be hearing from Martin, who's going to be our, well, opinionated practitioner for today. And I'll let him do his own introduction very, very shortly. But if you're here today to understand a little bit more about what MCP, this thing is all about that everybody seems to be talking about, what that is, then, well, you've come to the right place. We'll tell you a little bit more about, well, the world of MCP, the world of AI governances, and just to make it very clear, while MCP may be debatably good or bad, one thing MCP is not is your entire AI strategy. And that's pretty much what we're going to be trying to offer here today in terms of why your enterprise AI value chain must begin with APIs, good old APIs. So with that context being set, if we go on to the next slide, a quick introduction. I am Buddha, developer, advocate, and now director of product ecosystem here at Tyke, also the board chair for the Open API initiative. And this is a topic that I've been exploring personally, trying out all of the different opinions and what works, what doesn't work. And once again, I'll introduce Martin. Just before I do that, a little bit of housekeeping. As you might have noticed, there is a chat window that you have access to. Feel free to share your thoughts and opinions as you go along. There's no restriction in you doing that. At any point of time, if you do have a question, at the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A section there as well. And if it flows with our presentation, we might be able to pick some of those up as we go along. Otherwise, there is a dedicated 10 to 15-minute segment right at the end where we'll be exploring all of your burning questions on this particular topic, as well as on the back of what Martin has to say on this topic as well. Apart from that, I think we are pretty much good to go at this point of time. There is one thing that I do want to kick us off with, which is going to be a little bit of a poll, once again, just to gauge a little bit of your knowledge base so that we are hopefully on the, well, we hopefully get to know a little bit of you a little bit better. There is, you should see this on your screen just now, where I just want to gauge a little bit about your familiarity with MCP. Since you're here, I'm assuming that you have a degree of interest on this or have already tried some of this. So tell us where you are in your journey, whether you're using it in production already, which would be pretty interesting to know about, or you're experimenting with it, exploring it, have been disillusioned by it. I mean, anywhere you are in that journey, just tell us. And well, hopefully you'll get a next layer of your MCP understanding as we go along today. So without further ado, I do introduce Martin, our CEO and founder here at Tyke, is going to be taking you through the journey of why enterprise AI value chain starts with APIs. Over to you, Martin.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so AI value chain. Let's talk about this stuff. So I am Martin, CEO, CTO, co-founder of Tyke, General Curmudgeon. And I will be talking to you about, well, this particular topic, which I'm somewhat opinionated about. Now, first of all, I really dislike the word governance. It's the kind of word that makes people's eyes glaze over. It's out there with other boring words like synergy and touching base. And, you know, sorry for anyone here who used those words unironically. This is a bit. Today, I am unfortunately going to talk about governance, which can be dull, but it's also about AI, which is kind of cool. So overall, I hope this session for us early in the morning, for some of you post-lunch, will keep you awake. So let's go. Now, as an org, you ultimately want your AI projects to generate some kind of business value, be that through increased efficiencies, by streamlining your processes, increased productivity, through staff or process enablement, or direct value generation through innovation in new products. Now, through that lens, each of your projects need to be delivering efficiency. So either they're replacing processes that are slow or manual with some kind of automation, pretty classic one for an integration category. Productivity, so new tools for your workers to give them sort of superpowers, the main one at the moment being coding and maybe some kind of content generation, or actual innovation work. So new products, new opportunities that are enabled by some degree through Gen AI, right? Now, Gen AI on its own delivers none of those things. Ultimately, Gen AI only delivers value when it's coupled with a whole bunch of other components. And it's only since we've started adding databases and tools and other agents into the mix that Gen AI has shown any real value. So when folks talk about the AI supply chain, it's actually a misnomer, and we really need to call it the AI value chain. Though these two things are deeply intertwined, the steps in the value chain can't really be achieved without third-party suppliers, since most orgs nowadays are a huge mix of data silos. You've got your SaaS applications, you've got homegrown business logic, plus whatever legacy stuff that you're dragging with you into the future. Enterprises that are trying to sort of harness value from Gen AI need to really understand that Gen AI is absolutely nothing without a good and solid understanding of where the value in those existing processes comes from. And it's that makes up the sort of special sauce in successful AI projects. And now, the primary components to the value chain soup are the same questions, in an enterprise that you would ask for, let's say, a new team, right? So maybe let's look at it that way. So how will this team be informed? How will this team be empowered? And by what rules will they be governed? So treat your Gen AI project like a new team. So when it comes to Gen AI, how a model becomes informed comes in three ways. You've got your model fine-tuning, which is the really technical bit where you can add a layer. I'll talk about it in a minute, actually. Where you can add a layer which essentially changes the behavior of a model. Then there's the more traditional retrieval augmented generation approach, which is when you attach a database and you pre-fetch data to inform your AI context. That's huge right now. It's pretty much standard and the most recommended approach to doing any kind of informing of AI. And then you've got tool-based queries of data sources through databases and APIs. And this is where the LLM does the querying instead of being fed the data. So it's slightly different in terms of agency. So that's your first step. Oops. One second. Move this away because I can't see what I'm doing. The next step, so if you actually wanted to turn this into your stack, and we're going to do this at the end, we're going to have a whole stack of what this looks like. They sort of neatly go on top of each other. You have your LoRa. LoRa is how you fine tune. It's the technical term for it. Then you have your pre-LLM, so RAG, retrieval augmented generation, which is where you do initial queries into a database to inform your AI, and then it goes to your LLM tries to generate an answer, it still hasn't got an answer, so it might call a tool to get more data to formulate the answer or to formulate the next action. So that's the first part, that's just informing your team, right? The next step is empowering your team. Now, the second stage of Gen AI enablement, we ask how will the team be empowered, and there's two ways for that. You have, as we've discussed, LLM-based tool used with action APIs. So instead of an LLM querying data to find out more, so let's say searching your code base or looking up a customer CRM or stalking people on LinkedIn, that tool will instead the tool actually do something. It might generate a piece of content. It might change something in a database, or update your CRM. And then the second one is LLM-based agentic assignment, which ultimately leads to tool use, but it's very nuanced. And this is where instead of the AI talking to a tool and doing something with that, the AI talks to another agent, which has a very specific category of actions. Again, that agent will probably use tools to perform its actions, but still, it's a slightly different category. And when, why are there two? LLM calls the other reason why there's only two is because one of the things about tool use that they don't tell you about when they give you all the hype is that LLMs go a bit doolally when you give them any more than maybe 10 tools, and that's pushing it, right? They can only handle so many. So again, we have a nice little stack. You have your post-LLM tool use. So this is a looping action sort of piece. And then you might have multi-agent assignment, which implies tool use. It might even be a tool in and of itself. And I said, I'm splitting hairs here, but the reason agentic workflows are so popular is that LLMs are limited in what they can do and how they can operate without starting to break down. So you need to encapsulate functionality into more specific agents. So the last question we need to answer is, by what rules will this team be governed? Now, this question has technical and non-technical components because initially it comes down to your vendor selection. There's always implicit bias in all models. It's incredibly important for a business to be aware of that before letting an AI loose on a customer. So, for example, would you choose your customer support agent to be based on ChatGPT, or would you base it on Grok? I don't know if you've seen the news lately, but good luck doing it with Grok without getting sued. Anyway, so that again creates your governance stack. So once we've got our vendor selected, so our initial bias dealt with, we also need to implement guardrails. And this is where it gets quite complicated because we're dealing with, when you're dealing with LLMs, you're dealing with pseudo non-deterministic systems. So they are next word generators, right? They work off of statistics, very complicated ones, admittedly, but nonetheless, they are non-deterministic. So guardrails come in 2 or 3 forms. The first one actually goes right the way back to our LoRa fine-tuning, where we sort of actually put a special layer on top of the LLM to change its outputs. That can be quite dangerous, can cause forgetting and actually make the LLM less effective, but it's a way of doing it. Then you've got interpretive or fuzzy enforcement via a second LLM. So what happens is the response from the LLM goes through a second LLM that is specialized just on making sure that it's not talking nonsense or making promises it can't keep or putting you into a contractually binding situation where you owe someone money, and then says whether that request can go through or not. And then you've got the sort of much more simple hard enforcement through business logic and rule sets. This is the kind of stuff where you might use a named entity recognition system and then just replace stuff, or you might just look for certain patterns and pull those out. So that's your governance stack. This is how you would stop this team from doing anything it shouldn't do. It's a mix between technical and business logic, sort of fuzzy logic. But when you put that whole stack together, it's really complicated. You've got your request phase, you've got your agency phase, which is when it's actually doing something. And then you have your response phase, which is when you're making sure that what comes out of the LLM is trustworthy. That's one heck of a value chain, and that's a huge amount of hidden complexity and variability in the ability to execute on real value from an AI project. Now, not all AI projects will look like this, but they should look like this, because this particular supply chain provides this surety, it provides that guarantee that you need, while anything else you're doing puts your organization at risk. Now, we're an API management company. So of course, we think APIs are the be all and end all of the world. So, and when we look at this stack, all we really see is APIs. We see API calls between the user and the interface. We see API calls between the interface and your retrieval augmented generation system. We see API calls between the interface and the LLM, between the interface and the tools the LLM calls, because the LLM doesn't call them directly. Directly, it calls them via your UI. The interface and governance LLMs, so actually checking the response. And then the interface between the actual hard governance tooling, again, checking the response. And then again, a bonus one is API calls between interfaces if that interface is agentic. So it's turtles all the way down. And in this particular market, there's been some hype that I am controversially going to complain about, and it's called the Model Context Protocol. I got a bit of a bee in my bonnet about this thing. because, and I'm just to sort of put a caveat here. I have nothing against the protocol. I have a problem with the hype. So first off, if you've seen anything I've written over the past few months, you'll see that I'm actually a huge fan of standardization in APIs, and that extends to AI. Anthropic, the LLM company that runs Claude, announced the Model Context Protocol in order to standardize tool provisioning for LLMs specifically for chat interfaces. Unfortunately for consumers, the hype has forced MCP into this bizarre direction, one that, in my opinion, is an anti-pattern. So forgive me for a moment while I stand or sit on a soapbox and rant. We'll get back to the AI value chain in a minute after these short messages from my trauma from having to work in this space and deal with this hype. So first off, MCP is not for agentic use. Don't believe it. They tell you it is, but it's not. If you look at the value stack I've just shown you earlier, you'd be forgiven to think that MCP would just slot into that tool use section, right? But wrong. That stack that I showed you is for an agent, for an agentic approach, or a specific Gen AI project that has a very specific use case and outcome. Remember how I said agents can only handle, or LLMs can only handle so many tool calls, so you wrap them in specialized behavior. Now, MCP is meant to make swapping tooling out for a generic interface easy, like your chat interface. When you write an agent, you're writing code. Ultimately, an agent is a big ass Python script or Node script or something like that. And that code, even if it's only, and you will be writing code, even if it's just a little bit. Now, the overhead of MCP is not necessarily worth it compared to just implementing the API directly or implementing it using an SDK. Now, I go even further and say, why bother when you're writing your agent with an AI, probably? So why do you need this overhead of MCP? I mean, if you look at actually using MCP, you have to run processes or you have to integrate with a remote server, and the authentication is OAuth, not just a token, it's bananas. So for agents, it's actually ridiculously, there's way too much overhead to actually integrate MCP. MCP for agents only makes sense if the agent you have is sort of near AGI. By AGI, I mean general intelligence, the stuff that Sam Altman and the Anthropic CEO and Gemini guys will shove down your throat every day. The idea being in that it can select its own specialization for a task and then reason around what tools it needs, gather those tools and use them. But that's not the reality. That is not the agent that you are going to build. That's the idea of the agent an AI vendor wants to sell you, but it is not the reality. It's just a Python script. Secondly, MCP as a whole is bad for IT departments. Now, I know this is, an MCP and API webinar, and most of the folks here who are logged in will be here on a corporate laptop that is locked down, and you'll be lucky if you get to run solitaire on those things. Now, when MCP hype took over, it spawned hundreds of mini projects providing tooling around MCP or MCP servers. They are all written in Python or Node.js. And when you run them, they run straight off the internet. At least that's what the most documentation tells you to do, to run it straight off the internet using tools like UVX and NPX. Now, for the non-techies here, those are basically like just running it in your shell. It's just like, a little black box that shows up and typing it in there. Now, as a dev, an elder millennial dev, an archaic millennial dev, I remember when, piping a script from GitHub, like there's those simple shell commands, directly into your shell was considered awful practice. So why is this okay now? Now, of course, on a lockdown workstation, that will never happen. I mean, you can install Node, you can install Python. So MCP in that form, which is the majority of MCP servers as a whole, is awful for the enterprise, especially for enterprise IT people. But wait, Martin, I hear you shout. What about remote MCP servers? And you're right. You see, that's it. So remote MCP is how to do MCP without having to run stuff on your workstation. That is the way to provide tooling to chat interfaces safely in the enterprise. But like, it was only a few months ago, maybe 2 months ago, that the edgiest LLM interfaces started supporting this part of the protocol. And I think actually OpenAI's support is only remote MCP, and they've only just added it. Now, sure, all the vendors will catch up, but those thousands of random MCP servers out there on the internet written by randoms, not by vendors, by randoms, will they update theirs? Will any, say, an IT department run them, right? Will it work with scoped authentication, and will they set all that up properly? The OAuth spec is surprisingly complicated. So yeah, MCP for IT is a nightmare unless you're doing it with remote MCP servers. And even then, it's hard. Versus just implementing the API via the SDK. Again, I'm sounding like I'm raging at clouds here, but seriously, guys. So MCP is a nightmare. It shouldn't be used. Don't do it, folks. Don't get sucked into the hype of agentic MCP. It's bad for the org, it bakes in poor security practices, and it's practically ungovernable in its current hype state. Now, that's what I'm trying to say here, and I want to be super clear, is that I'm talking about MCP for agents. MCP for your little chat client, the one that comes installed on your laptop, that's fine. That makes sense. Again, running it locally does not, but that's where MCP is meant to live. Anyway, before I start frothing at the mouth, I'm going to get back on track here. Your AI value chain is ultimately APIs all the way down. And the good thing about APIs, and even MCP, and I said this to Buddha the other day, MCP is just an abstraction on top of your APIs in many cases, right? It's just making APIs simpler to consume for an AI. It's just another level of abstraction moving up to a different consumer. Now, the good thing about APIs, though, is there's a great deal of established best practice about how, to safely onboard people, how to govern them, and how to deploy them. Currently, most enterprises will have, I don't know, it'd be good to know here what folks are doing, but most enterprises will have an AI center of excellence, or if you're smaller, the AI guy, that are totally separate from the platform team, or the API center of excellence, or your platform team. Now, the funny thing is, in a year or two, AI is going to be the problem of the platform team, right? It's going to be the API center of excellence going to have to deal with this thing, because just like APIs, AI is a service provided through the same pipework with similar patterns. Another service that needs governance and user onboarding. Now, I say user onboarding because this is a really important point. Gen AI can provide efficiencies, productivity boosts, and innovation opportunities across an entire org. AI projects at the moment are the remit of engineering and data teams, and sort of these specialist technologists. That blanket ban that most organizations have about using ChatGPT on their device or using it, that's holding you guys back. It drives shadow IT because people are going to use it anyway. They're just going to put it on their own phone, or they're going to put it on their personal laptop, and then they'll run your secrets through that. So we need a solution to enable AI for everyone. So as a platform team, it's an important thing to understand how you can onboard users into AI in your org. And an organization that wants to properly deploy AI and get maximal value needs to include all stakeholders. And they need to figure out how to empower them and to make the most out of the easy wins of Gen AI. Because, this is more recent research, but Microsoft and a couple of others have done reports, or have put together little studies around whether people are actually generating value or revenue through Gen AI. And most Gen AI projects are not hitting production or are not hitting your bottom line yet. And that's a problem, right? Especially for anybody who's doing Gen AI, because it costs a fortune to run. So at least that's our opinion at Tyke. Some might say we're kind of stepping out of our APIM lane with how we think about AI being for everyone, not just for the API nerds. But just like APIs have moved out of being in the pure remit of specialized IT and integration folks into a wider ecosystem of organizational stakeholders. Nowadays, we have marketing technologists who aren't super techie, using APIs, and we have APIs being easier to use through platforms like Zapier or IFTTT, et cetera, et cetera. Now AI though is worse. It's even bigger. It's even easier to use. So API platform teams need to get to grips with that right now. All right, now just to finish my little rant, I'm going to hand over to Buddha here because we built a little tool. Well, little. We built a tool that is specifically that addresses a lot of this pain, including the MCP pain. I don't know if Buddha's going to touch on it, but I'm going to hand over to him now. And he's going to do the part you've all been waiting for, which is the product piece, because you want to see something. You want to hear me talk, right? So, Buddha, over to you. Go show folks how we solve AI problems with Tyke AI Studio.
Amazing. All right. Thanks so much, Martin. That was a great setup and explanation of where we stand on our opinion about MCP, the difference between the hype and the reality. And I think that chasm is very important for everyone to understand and therefore take the right steps towards the next direction. So in this next step, I want to approach the AI adoption part of your AI initiative, essentially looking at, obviously, you've got your different tools, you've got your processes, you've got the different people involved who today seem to be different, tomorrow will be a little bit different, merge perhaps with platform teams. And with that, we wanted to provide you with this, a little bit of an overview on what is the Tyke AI Studio. We'll be looking at adopting and scaling your AI initiatives with confidence. Before heading there, what would be very interesting for us to know as well is through this poll that is going to be up really, really quick shortly. We want to know a little bit about where you are today in your AI adoption journey as well. So tell us where you are. Are you just exploring use cases? Are you running pilots already? Are you actively scaling your initiatives at this stage? Operational, not currently pursuing? No wrong answers here. So let us know where you stand in all of this. So with all of that in mind, I think the key aspect that we want to focus on here is to make AI adoption as easy and simple as possible for the end users or the consumers of those applications. And at the same time, we want to make sure that the right governance, guardrails, and control mechanisms are in place so that the risk of adopting AI is minimized, if not eliminated, to the best of your abilities. So with that, if we go on to the next slide, Martin, here are a couple of different pain points. So just looking at these risk factors that form part of any value chain for that matter and seem to be a little bit more exaggerated when it comes to the AI value chain specifically, we looked at three key pain points. Firstly, there tends to be this notion of blanket chat GPT ban or any GPT ban for that matter, but still the pursuit of AI that still needs to exist, and executives just banning AI chat apps to solve a specific problem, which is de-risking these AI initiatives. And that seems to be a barrier, but that doesn't necessarily solve the problem because people still try things out on their own. And that leads to a different problem of shadow IT existences. And that's where we come into too many AI POCs potentially coming in without having the right oversight. So every team is running AI experiments. Looking at the poll right now, it looks like some of you, 50% of you in the room, you're already running pilots and prototypes, and every team seems to be being mandated to try things out for themselves and potentially figure out what to do as your next step. It's hard to manage and monitor all of that if you are a platform team who is looking after the governance aspect of things. And the final part is you still want to measure the value of these AI initiatives so that you can report back to the key stakeholders, the decision makers, whether it needs more investments, whether it needs more resources. It's cool now, but you still need those hard metrics on cost versus return across all of your AI initiatives. So which brings us to AI Studio. So if we go on to the next slide, I'm gonna switch over to the actual demo really, really shortly, and I'm gonna skip over this. So the AI Studio business, with AI Studio, essentially, you can own your AI value chain in its entirety, from choosing your own vendors to having confidence in governance and security, as well as the degree of flexibility that you require for your initiatives to succeed. So instead of trying to integrate AI into your business or trying to model all of that together, you're trying to make your business the driving factor of which AI is a part of and making it a success. So onto the final part, just before I move on to the demo. Next slide, please. Just to give you a bit of an understanding of the overall structure of what AI Studio actually is, there are a couple of components of this. The Tyke AI Manager, essentially powered by the AI Gateway, essentially where you have your administration, your governance, your configuration, your monitoring, your analytics, all of the control systems that you need to have in place to make your AI initiatives to safe and secure and governed. The AI manager is where you get started with all of those different abilities. You've got your AI portal, essentially, that is for your developers to be able to access different applications or build out their applications based on what your central platform teams are making available for consumption, again, within the guardrails of what's required and risk-free. And then finally, you've got your AI chat interface for other employees. And once again, think about the different folks who are non-developers potentially, who are also part of your organization, looking to get the most of the knowledge base that you may have garnered within your own organization and trying to figure out what is the best possible ways, getting the right answers, getting the right responses, and have the completion of that final last mile fulfillment journey of the value chain. So with that, hopefully this gives you a bit of an overview of what the structures are. The AI manager, again, looks at that connects the LLMs and the data source and tools together, and I'll show that shortly. All right, if you stop sharing, Martin, I'm gonna start sharing my screen. I think you should be able to see this now. I'm gonna just end the poll for the time being, so that center of my screen here. I'm gonna go over this a little bit quickly, simply because we want to provide you a bit more time to ask your burning questions potentially to Martin. So as I said, there are a couple of components of the AI Studio at this point of time. There is the chat, which if you look at the interface, it might feel a little bit familiar. I'll touch upon that shortly. The AI portal, which is probably quite important if you are a developer. Once again, I'll show you exactly what that looks like, and then the administration side of things. So I'm going to quickly show you the chat because this is probably the thing that you're most familiar with. Basically, you can create your own chat rooms here where it could be based on the kind of audience that you want, the kind of LLM connections that you want, the kind of tools you want. And if I were to go into one of these, you'll be able to see the interface seems to be quite similar to what you might be familiar with a chat GPT or a Claude interface that you might have already been familiar with. And obviously, you can ask similar questions if you so desired. Now, what is different and what is important to understand, especially in an enterprise environment, is this section on the right-hand side, which is your data sources and your tools. Now, these tools are essentially what enables you to get the right context and to potentially have the last mile fulfillment of your request from the chat interface. So without going into too much yet, I'm going to head over to the administration system to show you how all of these different systems essentially work. So if you go into the administration, the Tyke AI Manager, this essentially gives you an overview of all of the different LLMs, the data sources, the tools, the different user groups. You basically have end-to-end control over what is going to be accessible, how it's going to be accessible, and who it is going to be accessible to. So the analytics segment gives you an overview of the usage of all of these. There is one very important aspect to consider here, which is your cost. And I'll break that down when we go into the LLMs shortly. Under the LLMs, as the name suggests, you can choose which LLMs to add to. It could be a self-hosted edition of an LLM. As you can see, there is one from Claude. There is an external one based on a REST API. And if I were to go into each one of them, you will see the usage metrics as well as the cost implications for each one of them. Now, as you may or may not know, when it comes to cost with APIs, you've got monetization based on the endpoint calls that are being made. And therefore, it seems to be a little bit easier, but that does not entirely apply with AI because you're thinking about not just endpoint calls or queries being made, but how those queries are tokenized. And there is always a risk of trying to manage the overall cost and usage. So what you can do with this is essentially set your cost per model and then set a budget associated with each one of these models so that you know exactly how your usage patterns are going and you do not get a bill shock. So this gives you all of the access details that is required for you. I'm going to go quickly. Gives you a proxy log if you already have used the model in some application or through an interface for yourself. You can set your model prices if you wanted to do that, depending on the kind of subscriptions you may have. Coming to context management, you've got different data sources. These are essentially vector databases that you can host yourself, or you could be using embedding service vendors out of the box. These are all supported out of the box already. Moving on to tools, once again, these tools are essentially what provides that final context to your request through that chat interface or through your application that you're going to be making available through the AI portal. And interestingly enough, all of these tools are open AI compatible. So essentially, the ease with which you can add any particular tool is based on whether there is an open API definition available for that or not. So if you're familiar with this, there is a Swagger Pet Store open API definition that you basically helps you query information about different pets. It's all available in this form. So if you just go deeper, it imports an open API document and showcases all available operations that you can import directly. And I'll show you one of these in action as well. So if I were to add a new tool here, all I can actually, if I just go back, sorry, import open API, go into a direct import, post the content. And in this case, this is going to be the open API definition. And it'll automatically import all the details that's required, and it will create the tool. So now the tool is available for usage through the chat interface or through any application that I'm going to be making available as part of the portal. The only final step that I need to make here is go into my tool catalog and head on to edit and add this new tool that I have included. So once this is done, and if I wanted to go back to my chat interface once again, I'll see that there is a new tool that is available here. And if I wanted to interact with it, I can do that immediately. So for instance, if I wanted to say, give me all available headers, it will understand the context here to be HTTP bin. It'll get the right function operation here, and it will give me all of this information straight out. So it is that simple. So if you've got your open API definition available for your tools, it's extremely easy for you to essentially import all of that and make it available for your chat as well as your portal applications. So moving right along, you do have access to different user groups and teams. You wanted to do so, you have access to filter creation. So if you wanted to add any sort of filtration based on blocking PIIs, you can create your own script. This right here is a regex to prevent any sensitive information from being added to your chat interface or your application. Your AI portal, which we will touch upon very, very shortly. Then you've got configurations around your chat. So there are a couple of chat rooms that are available. You can create more depending on the context and the use cases. And if you just go deeper into it, you will see a few more details around analytics, its usage, and some defaults if you so desire to set it up. Once again, I'm not going too in depth into it because of the shortage of time, but we can go further down into the specifics if you are interested in learning more about it. Which takes us to the final aspect of this, which is the chat, which is the AI portal. So this, as a developer, essentially, if you've already built out your interface, you've already built out your overall application logic, and you want to add your LLMs or you want to add basically intelligence into your application, this is going to be your go-to place to do so. Now, you can start off with the different available LLM providers that may be available to you for access. You have your latest models, which would have currently available. There are 3 of them that are currently available. You can choose one of them to essentially build out your application. You can give it a name. Let's say my awesome application. This is my first application with AI Studio. You can select your data sources if they are made available to you. You can choose your LLMs if they are available, depending on what's available. I've pre-selected this already, and I can create my application. So this is the developer view. So you're sending this back to your platform team or whoever is managing your overarching, your administrator essentially, who can view the credentials, go in there and see whatever is required here and basically approve your application. So let me go back here. And the apps are now available. I can see this application right here, and I can click on approve to make it available for access. So if I now wanted to make an API call back to the Claude endpoints that are available using the token right here, I can go ahead and do so already. And then based on maybe if you were to use the Claude API endpoints, you'll be able to see exactly what that request looks like. So I'm going to just stop sharing really quickly just to give you a quick look at what that could look like. I've got one really simple demo available. There is Zoom. All right. I'm hoping you should be able to see this now. Able to see Michelle? Is that big enough? Perfect. I'm just going to pick out the app secret that I just created. Go over that really quickly. And then I'm just going to copy a quick curl command that goes back to the Anthropic messages endpoint, which we can explore if you want to. And if everything goes according to plan, hopefully, which it didn't, we can, which is always the case. Essentially, what it should do
You've hit a Cloudflare error, I think.
Yeah, I think it's probably the token expiring, but that's fine. So it's prepared for such a moment. So essentially what it should do is you've got your app secret that you've just generated from the portal and application. You make the endpoint request with a message. In this case, I'm asking the application to explain the advantages of API management for AI services in 3 bullet points. It goes back, gets me a response, gives me 3 bullet points here, less visually appealing, but it's available to me right here. So that's how, if you're a developer trying to integrate AI into your application, this is the way to go about doing it. So I'm going to stop here.
Just worth it. Sorry, but just to jump in, it's worth mentioning. One of the key things we try and do with the studio is you have 2 choices. You can either, as a developer, just use and drop in the SDK for your favorite LLM, or if you want to generalize your access and be able to swap the LLMs without having to change your application, the portal offers an OpenAI shim, so you can use the OpenAI API but use it for any vendor. Just sorry.
Correct. No, that's absolutely correct.
The most important feature, obviously. I'm sorry, being a pedant.
All right. Thank you so much. Hopefully that gave you a bit of a taste of it. Obviously, there is a lot more to explore with this, and we can definitely go do a bit of a deep dive after. Want to bring it back to Q&A. Obviously, there are a couple of things. There are giveaways. You can access this AI APIs and AI readiness ebook that we have recently launched, which Martin was a big part of creating and helping create. So you can download it today. We'll also have this available after. And then just the next slide, if you wanted to try out AI Studio for yourself, you can pretty much sign up for an early access after and let us know if you're interested to go deeper. So I'm going to stop here. I know we are at time already. Hopefully you are okay to stick around for a little bit longer because if you've got questions, now would be a great time to ask them.
Not a single one.
Well, then I've got mine. So, there's going to be interesting questions.
You thought you'd get away with it, but no, we have pre-prepared questions.
All right. So there's been a lot of conversation. We touched upon the value of MCP or hype of MCP. We touched a little bit upon open APIs as well, and obviously the role of APIs themselves. So what I'm quite interested and curious to know a little bit more about is how do you see these 2 open standards working together, conflicting with each other? How should people think about the open API specification or the open API definitions themselves and MCP as a way perhaps to connect with agentic workflows?
That is an excellent question, but I'm glad you asked it. This has not been rehearsed. No, I'm kidding. We have actually had a little chat beforehand, but mainly so that I got rid of all the swearing. before I answered on stream. So you think of your OpenAPI spec as it's the documentation, it's your source of truth for your interface layer, right? And I've already said, like, MCP is an abstraction on top of complexity to make it easy for AIs to access services. And remember, MCP isn't just for APIs. MCP can give you access to databases or to, your terminal console or to your browser. Like, ultimately, it's using a form of API to do that. But like in our use case, we're talking about HTTP APIs and stuff like that. So when it comes to services that are put through, HTTP, OpenAPI spec is your sort of bread and butter documentation to say, this is what we've got. And you can auto-generate it. And it's a fantastic tool to, create a portable document that documents that interaction surface. The thing is, if you look at, let's say, the OpenAPI spec for HubSpot or Salesforce, or I don't know, pick one of your favorite SaaS vendors, Jira, Atlassian. They'll be thousands of lines long, huge specs, or they'll be composite ones. So it'll be like one spec that links to like 100 others, and they will be auto-generated. And the quality isn't always great when you have to work with it. It's a wild west out there with OpenAPI spec, although it's a lot better than it used to be. So that's your surface area, and these specs are huge, and you're not going to go take that whole spec and just feed it to an LLM, because the LLM, you'll run out of context, or it'll just turn around and it'll just not know what to do with it. And you're giving it too much, really. It doesn't really know what to do with it, except for maybe build a tool on its own, like write some code. Whereas MCP, on the other hand, you build on top of something like OpenAPI spec, where you take the spec and you use it to generate an SDK, or you read the documentation it generates, and then write your own interface to then turn into an MCP server, so that you have a simplified version. So you have, out of 1,000 API endpoints, you have 10. And those 10 are either direct calls or might be workflows. So you might actually be going back and forth and back and forth. The MCP protocol is pretty complicated, and most people focus only on the tool use piece. But MCP can do stuff like, you can say, to use this tool, the tool can then action to an API or to a service. That service can then call back into the MCP server and say, hey, MCP server, use the AI of this user to go and do something so that I can finish my work. So the flow goes in reverse. So, which is risky as anything. And there's injection attacks and all kinds of things that can go wrong here from a security perspective. It's bananas. But again, sorry, to come back to the point, MCP is an abstraction layer on top of your artifacts from your OpenAPI spec. So it is an abstraction to make things simpler. So it's that whole on the shoulders of giants piece where, you go from nobody writes assembler code, they stopped writing assembler code, they started writing C. People stopped writing C, they started writing in Java and Go, right? It's just abstractions on top of complexity.
So would it be fair to say pretty much that if your OpenAPI definition is essentially the entire surface area of your API, everything that it can do, all possible endpoints for all potential use cases are going to be available, designed, and documented using the OpenAPI definition. And then when you come to things like MCP, for instance, then that has a very specific use case and specific access that you want to provide as a subset
Right.
of that overall surface area. And that's kind of the relationship that you think about in your mind.
Yeah, I mean, you have to think about it like, you have your MCP server. You have to ask yourself, do I want my AI to be able to alter records in my database?
Right.
Most people would have a visceral reaction to that, saying no, right? Not unless it's very controlled. But your OpenAPI spec will give you all of that access unless you've scoped the request token in some way to say they can't use those endpoints. You've essentially just exposed the whole API to the LLM. So MCP allows you to sort of coalesce things into workflows and into patterns that the AI should follow without the AI having to intuit it.
Yep, got it. And just to bring it back a little bit to the AI Studio as well, there is a degree of control that you might be able to achieve with this as well, where if you recall just now, we added this HTTP bin API. Again, very simple use case here. And if I were to go in there, what it managed to import out of this Open API specification are these different operations that are available as part of the document. But if I don't want this to be available and accessible, essentially, I could just remove them for this particular use case and then just update my tool. So now when I'm connecting that tool back to either the application itself or the chat interfaces, then the context here is going to be restricted to those 4 operations as opposed to exposing every single possible operation out there. So that's one of
Just
the other level
one
of
more thing, actually, while you're on this screen is, and it's not shown here, but I think it's because of the version you're running. AI Studio, actually, did you mention that AI Studio allows you to expose these tools as MCP servers?
I did not. Actually, no, that's a good point. No,
Yeah.
go ahead, please.
So this is what Buddha just did. That HTTP bin API there, for example, would for the portal user, it's not in this build. It's in the build that you can download from our site. You could expose an MCP server that you can then use, and it uses all the OAuth permissions and scoping and stuff like that in order to scope out what that user can do. I see Richard asked a question here saying, but how would you control and vet third-party API integration into MCP environments? That's a great question. So in the AI Studio case, you just saw what we did. We had the open API spec. If you're the platform team or the AI team, you import that open API spec and then you expose that as a remote MCP server. So you vetted it. You said, okay, that's a third-party API that we want to use. I know what that spec looks like. I've used this API. You can put that in and then say, actually, for the MCP users, I only want read access here, here, and here. And you can actually, there's flows we've got where you can scope that even further. So you can scope it at an auth token level to say they can actually only use these features of the MCP versus those. But that's a really technical demo. If you're doing, now, if you have an MCP vendor, like I would only ever trust an MCP server supplied by a vendor. So for example, GitHub have one, HubSpot have one, Salesforce has one. They're like, okay, we have MCP servers now, which means they support it, which means they're vetting it. And you know, if you need to sue somebody, you can sue them, as opposed to some rando. So yeah, so the idea ultimately is the vetting has to be done by the platform team. So either you trust the vendor or not. And what you really need to look for is this reverse calling capability, because it is kind of scary. So you can vet the open API spec. That's one thing. That's just the API. But if you're like talking to a vendor MCP server, that might not be based on an open API spec. And the vendor MCP server might actually be custom built for the vendor. And they might be doing smart stuff, you know, like where they're like, let's really use the AI, and they'll call back into your AI. And you need to check the actual MCP server to say, well, what features does it use? Is it just tool calling, or is it tool calling and then this sort of reverse calling capability? MCP is a pretty big protocol. Just most focus on that tool calling capability. So your vetting needs to really be around not so much the API, because there's no API spec, it's an API. What you need to vet is what can the MCP server do? And I mean, if you've looked around recently, there have been at least 3 or 4 major security breaches with MCP servers because of prompt injection attacks and things like that. So MCP is complex and dangerous, and you do need to vet the traffic. Exactly. Outcomes and actions.
Great. No, right. Great question. Thanks, Richard. We're almost at time. There was one question that came up during someone from LinkedIn essentially asked this. Over to you, Martin. Do you consider agentic or workflow-centric approaches as the only way to improve MCP potentially, or also taking a data-centric approach would be helpful here?
Okay, so you use data to inform an LLM response, right? So data-centric approaches, you go to a database and you either pre-fill or you let the LLM inform itself by querying a data source to do stuff, or to better inform its answer. Now, that's a great way. It depends on your outcome for the agent. Like, what are you trying to do? So, as I said right at the start, is most agents are designed for a specific purpose, right? They do one thing. They're a customer support agent, or they're a sales agent that will go and pummel some poor guy's email inbox to try and get them to respond, an SDR agent or something like that. And those are actionable agents. And because they're so specific, you really are designing for, when you're designing an agent, you're designing it for its direct outcome. And you have to think of it as designing an application. but you now have access to this fancy LLM logic to be able to write decent outputs, to be able to customize things, to be able to make certain decisions. But you have to be aware that there is an inherent risk in that, because these are not necessarily deterministic systems. And that's when you're doing any kind of design for an agent, the data piece just informs it in terms of how to do things, whereas the MCP piece is how you enable it to perform actions if you're taking an action-oriented approach. Does that answer the question? I don't know if I'm going off topic here.
No, that's all right. I think this seems to be the best way to understand the question. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. I think we're at time now. So thank you everyone who's joined here. What I'm going to do is just a final step in this is the final poll, just to let us know how we can help you as part of the next steps. Is it a trial that you want to look at as a bit more of an in-depth look into the AI Studio itself? There is an event which I'm going to come to really, really shortly. But also, if you want to know more about some of the information around AI readiness, the ebook that you just saw, or speak to one of our experts about your own use case, that more than happy to help out with all of it. Now, there's one other element there, which is for the first time here, we are announcing our next, I guess, mini conference that's going to be happening in, I think in October of this year, which is we are calling LeapX, or in this case, it's going to be LeapX Finance. This is going to be a half-day event where we're going to be exploring the entire concept of API governance in the world of financial services, broadly around BFSI. We'll also be looking at things like AI. We'll be looking at how AI adoption gets impacted by any compliance requirements, standardization, what role APIs and API management play in all of those. So if you're familiar with the Leap conferences that happened earlier in beginning of this year for on API governance, this is meant to be a little bit more of a specialized edition of that, to specifically go a little bit deeper into the world of financial services, go a little bit deeper into what that means from an API governance standpoint, from an AI governance standpoint, and what and how potentially Tyke can help out with it. So if you're interested, let us know. Again, there's no rush necessarily, but if you are interested, let us know and we'll help you get signed up immediately. As and when you are the first in the world, apart from the people at Tyke, to know about this conference and its existence. But hopefully we'll see you there. And hopefully, as far as today's conversation goes, you got a little bit more of an understanding into the world of MCPs themselves, the good, the bad, and the ugly, as well as what the AI value chain looks like, what are the different elements of that, where something like an AI studio essentially helps you in your overall AI adoption journey. Again, it was a much shorter demonstration right now. You can go a lot deeper if you're interested. So once again, thank you so much, Martin, for presenting a very compelling story. Thank you, everybody, for being here and participating and engaging with us all throughout. Until next time, thank you so much. Have a lovely rest of the day and rest of the week. We'll see you next time. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.